The homeless musician's guitar. The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight, turning the Seattle streets into rivers of neon reflection and broken dreams. Kurt pulled his jacket tighter as he stepped out of the venue's back exit, the adrenaline from the show still coursing through his veins. The performance had been electric, one of those rare nights when everything clicked, when the music felt less like performance and more like exorcism. But now, in the alley behind the club, reality was seeping back in like the cold October rain. He was fishing for his cigarettes when he heard it. At first, it was just another layer in the urban symphony, car horns, distant sirens, the hum of streetlights. But there was something else, something that made him pause with his lighter halfway to his mouth. Guitar strings. Someone was playing guitar out here in the rain. Kurt followed the sound around the corner, past overflowing dumpsters and graffiti-covered walls that looked like abstract art in the sodium light. The music grew clearer as he walked, not amateur fumbling, but real playing. Someone who knew what they were doing. He found the source huddled under a fire escape, about 50 yards from the venue. An old man, maybe 60, sat cross-legged on a piece of cardboard, bent over a guitar that looked like it had survived several wars. His hair hung in grey, greasy strands, and his clothes were layered in that particular way that spoke of too many nights sleeping rough. But his hands moved across the fretboard, like they were having a conversation with God. Kurt recognized the song, a blues progression that was older than both of them, but the man was playing it like he'd written it himself. There was pain in every note, but also a kind of dignity that made Kurt's chest tighten. The old man's guitar case lay open in front of him, and Kurt could see it contained maybe $3 in loose change and a soggy sandwich wrapped in plastic. A handwritten cardboard sign leaned against the case. Former session musician. Will play for food. Former session musician. Kurt felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the rain. He approached slowly, not wanting to interrupt the music. The old man sensed his presence and looked up, his fingers never stopping their dance across the strings. His eyes were the color of rain clouds, and they held the kind of weariness that came from seeing too much of the world's cruelty. "You're that kid from the show tonight," the old man said, his voice gravelly but not unkind. "Heard the music from out here. You boys made some noise." Kurt crouched down, ignoring the way the wet pavement soaked through his jeans. "You heard us from here?" The old man's mouth twitched into what might have been a smile. "Son, when you've been listening to music as long as I have, you can hear a good riff from 3 blocks away, and that was some good riffing." Kurt studied the man's face. Up close, he could see the toll that street life had taken. The hollow cheeks, the premature lines, the way his hands shook slightly when they weren't occupied with the guitar. But there was something else, something in the way he held himself that suggested this hadn't always been his story. "What's your name?" Kurt asked. "Eddie Sullivan." The old man's fingers moved into a different progression, something that sounded like it belonged in a smoky jazz club rather than a rain-soaked alley. "And before you ask, yeah, I know who you are. Kurt Cobain. Read about you in the music papers." Kurt felt a flush of embarrassment. Here was a man living on the streets, and he was worried about magazine coverage. "How long have you been out here?" Eddie's laugh was bitter as black coffee. "Going on 2 years now, but I've been playing guitar for 47. He looked down at his instrument with something that might have been love. "This old girl and me, we've seen some things together." The guitar was a disaster. Kurt could see that even in the dim streetlight. The body was cracked, held together with duct tape and prayer. 3 of the tuning pegs were broken, and the neck was warped so badly that Kurt wasn't sure how Eddie managed to get any decent sound out of it at all. "What happened?" Kurt asked quietly. I mean, if you don't mind me asking. Eddie's hands stilled on the strings for the first time since Kurt had been watching. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of rain hitting metal and the distant hum of the city. Same story as 1,000 other musicians, Eddie said finally. Started playing in high school, got good, moved to the city with big dreams, spent the 70s and 80s as a session player. Nothing glamorous, just steady work. Backup for singers you've never heard of. Commercial jingles, wedding bands when times got tight. Kurt waited, sensing there was more. Had a wife, Sarah. She used to come to all my gigs, even the shitty ones. Even when I was playing Happy Birthday for some rich kid's party, she'd sit in the back and smile like I was playing Carnegie Hall. Eddie's voice got softer. Lost her to cancer in '89, and after that, well, music just stopped making sense. Kurt felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. He'd heard versions of this story before. The musician who lost their muse, their reason for playing. But usually, those stories ended with the artist finding their way back to music. This one clearly hadn't. Started drinking, Eddie continued, his voice matter of fact. Then pills. Anything to make the silence stop. Lost the apartment, lost the good gigs, lost most of my gear. This old guitar is all I got left from the old life. He strummed a chord, and despite the instrument's obvious flaws, it rang true. But she still sings for me. Even when everything else is broken, she still sings. Kurt looked at Eddie's hands again, calloused and weathered, but still moving with the muscle memory of decades of practice. This wasn't some amateur who'd picked up a guitar as a hobby. This was a real musician, someone who understood the language of strings and frets in the same way that Kurt did. You know what the fucked up thing is? Eddie said, and there was no self-pity in his voice, just tired honesty. I taught kids your age how to play. Had a little studio in my apartment, gave lessons to pay the bills between sessions. Some of them went on to do real things with music. Kurt felt something twist in his gut. Here was a man who'd spent his life serving music, nurturing it in others, and now he was playing for change in an alley, while Kurt was inside, selling out venues. Play something else, Kurt said suddenly. Eddie raised an eyebrow. You got a request? Anything. Something you wrote. Eddie's hands moved to a different position on the neck, and he began to play something Kurt had never heard before. It was beautiful and broken at the same time, like a lullaby sung by someone who'd forgotten how to sleep. The melody wandered through minor keys with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going, even if the destination was sad. Wrote that one for Sarah, Eddie said without stopping. Called it Ghosts in the Amplifier, about how the music you make with someone stays in your gear long after they're gone. Kurt closed his eyes and let the music wash over him. It was the kind of song that made you feel less alone, even though it was clearly born from the deepest kind of loneliness. When Eddie finished, the silence that followed felt sacred. That was beautiful, man, Kurt said, and he meant it. Eddie shrugged, but Kurt could see the pride flicker across his face. Still got a few good songs in me, I guess. Kurt made a decision. Come on. What? Come with me. Kurt stood up, ignoring the way his knees protested from crouching in the rain. There's a music store about 6 blocks from here. Open late on show nights. Eddie looked suspicious. What for? You need a new guitar. Eddie's face hardened. I don't need charity, kid. It's not charity, it's... Kurt struggled to find the right words. It's music helping music. I can't pay you back. I don't want you to. Kurt extended his hand to help Eddie up. Look, I just made more money tonight than you probably see in 6 months. And you know what? None of it means anything if guys like you are sitting in alleys playing broken instruments. Eddie stared at Kurt's outstretched hand like it might bite him. You don't know me. For all you know, I'll just sell whatever you buy and use the money for drugs. Kurt kept his hand extended. Will you? Eddie met his eyes, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. Finally, Eddie reached up and took Kurt's hand. "No," he said quietly. "I won't." The music store was one of those cramped, overstuffed places that smelled like rosin and old wood. The owner, a heavy-set guy with a gray beard, looked like he was about to close up when Kurt and Eddie walked in, dripping rainwater on his floors. "We're actually just closing," he started to say, but then his eyes widened as he recognized Kurt. "Oh shit, you're from the show tonight. Holy crap, man, that was incredible." Kurt smiled politely. "Thanks. Listen, we need to look at some guitars. Acoustics." The owner's gaze shifted to Eddie, taking in his appearance with the kind of practiced assessment that store clerks develop. Kurt could practically see him deciding whether this was a waste of his time. "This is Eddie," Kurt said firmly. "He's a musician." Something in Kurt's tone made the owner nod respectfully. "Of course. What kind of sound are you looking for?" Eddie hadn't said a word since they'd entered the store. He stood slightly behind Kurt, water still dripping from his hair, looking like he wanted to bolt back to his alley. Kurt could understand the feeling. The fluorescent lights were harsh after the street, and everything in here was clean and expensive and intimidating. "Why don't you look around?" Kurt suggested gently. "See what speaks to you." Eddie moved toward the wall of guitars, like he was walking through a minefield. Kurt watched as his eyes roamed over the instruments, a wall of possibilities that probably seemed as distant as the moon to someone in Eddie's position. Eddie stopped in front of a mid-range acoustic. Nothing fancy but solid-looking. His hands hovered over the strings without quite touching them. "Go ahead," Kurt said. "Play it." "I shouldn't. My hands are dirty." "Guitars are meant to be played by dirty hands," the store owner said, surprising them both. "That's how they get seasoned." Eddie carefully lifted the guitar from its hanger and settled it into playing position. The difference was immediate. This instrument was in tune, balanced, responsive in ways that his broken guitar couldn't be. When Eddie struck the first chord, it rang clear and true, filling the small store with sound. He played a few measures of the song he'd performed in the alley, and Kurt could hear how much better it sounded on a proper instrument. The melody had room to breathe, the harmonies had depth. It was like watching a painter work with good brushes for the first time in years. "How much?" Kurt asked the owner quietly. "That one's $400. Kurt winced. It was more than he'd planned to spend, but watching Eddie play, seeing the way his whole posture had changed when he held a functioning instrument, Kurt knew it didn't matter. "We'll take it." Eddie stopped playing abruptly. $400? Kurt, no, that's too much. "It's perfect for you." "I told you, I can't pay you back." Kurt turned to face Eddie fully. "Listen to me. I've been playing music for 10 years, and I've met a lot of people who call themselves musicians. Most of them are just kids with guitars, making noise, and hoping someone will pay attention. But you're the real thing. You understand music in a way that most people never will." Eddie started to protest, but Kurt cut him off. "I'm not finished. When I was starting out, there were people who helped me, gave me a place to crash, let me use their equipment, taught me things I couldn't have learned on my own. And you know what they told me when I tried to pay them back? They said, 'Don't pay me back. Pay it forward.'" Kurt pulled out his wallet and counted out the bills. "So that's what this is. Someone helped me, and now I'm helping you. And maybe someday you'll help someone else." Eddie's hands were shaking as he held the guitar. "I don't deserve this." "Music doesn't care what you deserve," Kurt said softly. "Music just wants to be played. And you play it like it matters." The transaction was completed quickly after that. The store owner threw in a case and some extra strings, clearly moved by what he was witnessing. As they prepared to leave, Eddie turned to Kurt one more time. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Kurt thought about it for a moment. Because I've been where you are. Not on the streets, but lost. Feeling like music was the only thing keeping me alive, but not sure if that was enough. And because... He paused, trying to find the right words. Because every song you play